What would you do if you woke up and couldn't move your head? For one man in Italy, it wasn't a nightmare. It was a 2-day reality. In January 2025, police responding to a welfare check made a discovery that defied belief. A 64-year-old man was found conscious, trapped in his bed by a 16-inch crossbow bolt embedded in his skull. His survival was already a miracle, but the real challenge was just beginning for neurosurgeon Professor Maurizio Iacoangeli and his team at Torrette Hospital in Ancona. This is the story of a point-blank shot, a journey through the human brain measured in millimeters, and the elite surgical team who performed a rescue mission where a single mistake meant instant death. The room was not just quiet. It was thick with a silence that felt like a physical substance, a heavy, velvety gloom broken only by the faint, rhythmic whisper of a man's own breath, a sound he heard too loudly in his own ears. In the coastal city of Ancona, in an apartment that held the familiar, comforting smells of old books and polished wood, a 64-year-old man sat on the edge of his bed, a figure caught in a tableau of profound stillness. He was an enthusiast, a man whose hands, now resting limply in his lap, were more accustomed to the careful, respectful handling of historical replicas, the weight of a medieval longsword, the intricate mechanism of a flintlock pistol. But tonight, the object beneath his fingers was not a relic. It was a modern, brutally efficient crossbow, its synthetic stock cold and unyielding, its string taut with potential energy that hummed against the silence. The moonlight, a pale, indifferent sliver through the window, caught the gleam of the mounted bolt's tip, painting a line of silver along the sharpened point aimed at nothing, yet at everything. This final, quiet moment stretched, filled not with thought, but with a vast, overwhelming static, the prelude to a cataclysm that would defy all medical logic and begin a countdown measured not in minutes, but in millimeters. The sound, when it came, was not the dramatic twang in cinema, but a sharp, visceral thwump of released tension, a mechanical exhalation that was swallowed instantly by the ensuing stillness. There was no cry, only a soft, surprised gasp lost in the sudden, violent physics of the event. A 16-inch carbon fiber bolt, traveling with the quiet force of a modern projectile, found its mark. The man's head was snapped backward by the impact, not with a spray of blood, but with a terrible, solid finality. And then, nothing. The expected end did not come. Consciousness, instead of fleeing, narrowed into a tunnel of shocking, hyper-real sensation. He was aware of the impossible weight anchoring his skull to the pillow, a novel, terrifying pressure centered in his forehead. He could feel the unyielding shaft against his brow, a bizarre new limb that tethered him to the spot. The initial shock was a merciful anesthetic, but as it ebbed, it was replaced by a dawning monolithic reality. He was alive, irrevocably pinned, and utterly alone. The moon tracked its path across the sky, replaced by a gray dawn that did nothing to warm the chill seeping into his bones. 48 hours began their slow, excruciating march. Thirst became a rasping demon in his throat, hunger a dull, distant ache. He drifted in and out of a fitful consciousness, visited by hallucinations born of pain and dehydration, shadows that moved at the edge of his vision, whispers in the silent room. Each time his eyes fluttered open, the reality was the same: the ceiling, the shaft, the anchoring truth of his predicament. It was a solitary confinement ordained by a single irreversible action, a testament to a body clinging to function against a catastrophic insult. Across town, a different kind of anxiety was building. A missed call led to another, then another, piling into a cairn of concern. A family member, their intuition ringing with alarm, finally contacted the carabinieri. The scene that greeted the officers was one that would linger in their professional memories forever. Forcing the door, they entered the silent apartment, their boots echoing in the stillness.
And there, in the bedroom, they found him. Not a scene of carnage, but one of eerie, suspended animation. His eyes were open, clouded with a fog of confusion and exhaustion, tracking their movement. From the center of his forehead, the fletched tail of the bolt protruded, a surreal and horrifying exclamation point. He could mumble, but his words were nonsensical, a soup of fragmented language. The frontal lobe, the seat of coherent thought and speech, had been violated. The bolt was so long it acted as a physical restraint, preventing him from turning his head. This careful, horrified discovery triggered a new race. Paramedics, trained for trauma, faced their most delicate extraction yet, moving a man who, in essence, was a living pincushion. With excruciating care, they stabilized his head and neck, immobilizing the lethal pendulum, and transported him to Torrette Hospital, where the waiting neurosurgical team prepared for a case that would test the very edges of their skill. The first miracle was of material. In the glaring light of the CT scan room, the carbon fiber bolt revealed its paradoxical gift. Unlike metal, it was radiolucent, invisible to X-rays. For the first time in medical history, surgeons could see a clear, uninterrupted map of the devastation with the weapons still in situ. The images that glowed on the screens were a thing of macabre beauty and profound shock. The arrow had entered just above the right eyebrow, a perfect entry point. It then traveled on a downward trajectory, piercing the protective dura mater and entering the frontal lobe. But its path was of a diabolical precision. It slid between the two hemispheres of the brain, missing the thick bundle of nerves connecting them by a hair's breadth. It continued its journey posteriorly, towards the brainstem, the switchboard for heartbeat and breathing. There, nestled against the most vital structures in the human body, it stopped. Professor Maurizio Iacoangeli, the lead neurosurgeon, would later describe it with awestruck clarity. The bolt had missed the major sagittal sinus vein, a rupture of which would cause instantaneous catastrophic hemorrhage by less than 1 millimeter. It had veered a similar microscopic distance from the brainstem. A millimeter further, he stated, and the patient would have died instantly. He was lucky. This was luck measured on a cellular scale, a cosmic roll of the dice that had landed on the 1 in a billion chance of survival. This incredible luck, though, presented a deadly surgical paradox. Inside the closed vault of the skull, the bolt was no longer just a projectile. It had become a critical, life-preserving plug. It had likely transected smaller arteries and vessels, and its presence was now stanching the flow of blood. Removing it carelessly would be like yanking a spear from a wound, unleashing a torrent that would flood the brain and cause irreversible damage or death within seconds. The standard playbook was useless. Professor Iacoangeli needed a strategy for what was essentially a battlefield injury in a civilian operating theater. He turned to the protocols of modern warfare medicine, consulting the work of pioneers like Dr. Rocco Armanda, a U.S. Army neurosurgeon who had honed his skills treating penetrating head trauma in Iraq and Afghanistan. The operation was reconceived not as a simple removal, but as a tactical extraction. It required a military-style briefing. Every member of the team rehearsed their role. Surgical approaches were planned to gain immediate vascular control. Clamps and cautery tools were readied like instruments of delicate war. Units of blood were lined up in the theater. They were preparing to navigate a minefield where the mines were the patient's own blood vessels. The atmosphere in the OR was one of focused intensity, a silent hum of concentration beneath the bright surgical lights. The patient, under deep anesthesia, was more a landscape now, a terrain of drapes and antiseptic centered on that stark foreign shaft. Professor Iacoangeli, his hands steady beneath the magnifying lenses of his loupes, began. This was not a pull, it was a reverse engineering of trauma. Guided by the mental map from the scans, he applied gentle, continuous traction along the exact angle of entry, minimizing any shearing force that could tear new pathways through the delicate brain tissue. There was a collective holding of breath, a moment suspended outside of time, and then, with a smooth, almost anticlimactic motion, the carbon shaft, which had been part of this man's reality for over 2 days, slid free. It was placed on a tray with a soft, final click, a mundane sound for an extraordinary object. But the true test began immediately. The surgical team leaned in, their eyes scanning the deep channel for the first sign of the predicted hemorrhage. Seconds ticked by, measured in the steady beep of the cardiac monitor. The bleeding, when it came, was manageable, a welling that was quickly and precisely controlled by the prepared team. The immediate battle was won. Yet, as the patient was transferred to the intensive care unit, his condition listed as guarded, the surgeons knew the war was far from over. The brain, this delicate organ that had been so violently trespassed upon, would now face the trials of swelling, of potential infection, and of its own miraculous, uncertain healing. In the days that followed, as the medical team fought to stabilize his body, a parallel investigation sought to stabilize the narrative of how. The police inquiry circled 2 equally haunting possibilities. The first was the narrative of the tragic accident, the experienced enthusiast, perhaps performing maintenance, checking a mechanism, his finger slipping on the trigger, a component failing. A single mundane moment of misfortune magnified 1,000-fold by terrible physics. The second possibility was darker, a descent into a private, inscrutable hell. A deliberate act born of a pain so profound it chose the most immediate and decisive tool at hand. Yet investigators found no suicide note, no history of diagnosed mental illness, no financial or personal ruins conspicuously laid bare.
If stories that explore the incredible limits of human survival fascinate you, please consider subscribing to Crusader TV. We delve into the true stories where medicine, mystery, and the human spirit collide. If this journey through a millimeter of chance resonated with you, let us know by hitting the like button. Your support helps us share more forgotten histories and medical marvels. Thank you for watching. Until next time.